Okay, we are recording. We are live. Everybody should see the slide as well as see me and hear the audio. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to week 2 of our senior seminar for civil engineers. A couple quick announcements. The attendance grades are up to date. I recorded the attendance from last week. I also have compiled the results from the preference poll that everybody did. I did have a couple students that didn't do it, but the vast majority of you did, and I'll show the results on the next slide. And I do want to entertain a little bit of discussion about that. So, feel free to, turn your microphones on when we get to that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Our main point of discussion today is the FE exam and the process to obtain your license. And so that's going to take up the majority of what we talk about today. But before I get into the poll, I was just curious, does anybody have any questions about, really anything about the class, about, how things are going this semester? Floor is yours. All right. Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about the exam. And then, like I said, I'm going to entertain some discussion from you all. So again, don't hesitate to turn your mic on. So every one of you all, completed your preference poll. And so what you did is you ranked your preference on topics on the exam. What I did is I queried everybody's results for everybody in the class. And I said, okay, how many people voted for math? How many people voted for ethics? How many people voted for what have you? And I plotted it, and this is what you get I hit it one too many times. All right, so this is what you get. And so what you're seeing here is on the left, you see all of the topics that are covered on the exam. So there's 14 topics, I think it is. And the bars show the total score. And so I inverted it because I figured that would be easier to understand. So the topics with the longest bars up top are the ones that were most requested. And so by and large, the class as a whole requested mechanics of deformable bodies the most. So we're definitely doing that. In fact, next week we're going to start with an FE review on mechanics of deformable bodies. But you go down the line and statics and dynamics go together. Then you had surveying, which was a little bit higher than I expected. But what happens once you get past like statics, like the next 5 topics, they're really, really close. We had structures, we had materials, fluids, geotech, and then math. And they're so close that I'm not sure. I almost want to get some discussion from the classes, like, is there any particular topic you're passionate about? Like, when I look at this, the results of the poll, I know we're going to cover deformables, and I know we're not going to cover water resources and environmental. But some of those topics in the middle, we have a little bit of some wiggle room as to what we cover, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are. And so I'm sort of talking about like from econ down to like math. Is there any one of these topics that anybody's particularly passionate about? Any cases you want to make as to like why you want to cover one versus another? I'm just curious. I'd like to entertain some discussion on that if anybody has any points they'd like to make. Don't be shy. Yes, sir, Mr. Adkins.
So we're going to cover each of the big subjects once a week, correct? Like the mechanics of deformation. Sorry.
That's a good question. That's one thing I kind of forgot. Some of these topics might take a little bit longer. Like there was such a request for deformables that there is a chance I actually take that one and extend it over 2 weeks for a couple reasons. Deformables does tend to play into other topics. Like if you understand deformables, it makes geotech easier. It makes structures easier. By understanding deformables, you kind of have an inherent understanding of statics. So we might take deformables and extend it over 2 weeks. I'm not sure yet. But some of the other topics would probably only be like 1 week. Anybody have any passionate opinions one way or the other? Everybody's shy on Wednesday. Nobody wants to say anything. You you do not want to say anything? Almost now want to call on you. I understand. Anybody have any anybody else? Anybody have any strong opinions over any one of these topics? Geotech 100% over math. Okay. And I knew dynamics would be high up. Yeah. Let me say one thing about dynamics. I think you'd be surprised how straightforward the dynamics is on the exam. It's not super complex, dynamics. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's velocity, acceleration, pretty basic. It's not going to be incredibly complex stuff. Why don't we do this? All right. So, because again, I want to get some feedback, but I think everybody's kind of shy. So let's do this. All right. Next week, let's cover deformables. Okay. And so what I'll do between now and next week is prepare a deformables lecture. Now, we're a little bit constrained on time, more so than we have been when we taught this class in the past, because in the past, the class would be at 4 o'clock. And so if we went over a little bit, it wasn't really that big of a deal because nobody really had anything afterwards. But I mean, like I have something afterwards. I have statics right after this, so because I'm teaching statics at 1. So instead, I'll prepare the lecture to cover, to do a good job of covering deformables in 50 minutes. And if I can't cover the topic well enough in 50 minutes, then we'll do it over 2 weeks. Because I think it is a pretty important topic on the exam, and it covers, like, it feeds into other topics. After deformables, that happened because of the coronavirus. What happened was we didn't have a room big enough to have everybody filling in that one section. Yeah, I'm not going to read that comment on the video, on the recording. Oh, I think we all needed it. All right. So what we'll do is we'll cover deformables for 1, maybe 2 weeks, and then we'll cover dynamics. And then maybe what we ought to do after we've done a couple of review sessions is we'll come back to maybe the poll and sort of ask ourselves, okay, now that we've gotten a few out of the way, is there something like maybe that'll change your opinion on well, maybe we need to cover this first and then this and so on and so forth. Because, like, for instance, let's take math. Like, math is a pretty important section on the exam, and it feeds into everything. So you might want to cover geotech more now, but 3 weeks from now that might not be the case. So let's just chew on it. But I think what's most pertinent is that we actually talk about just talk about the exam, and so that's really what the main discussion of today is. Now, some of you may have had me for for co-op, and I think I've talked about this in 103 before. So there is a chance that you've seen this presentation before, and I understand that. But we're going to do it again because this really matters to you now. You all are seniors in civil engineering, which means you are basically prepared now to take your exam. Anybody in this class could sign up and take the exam now and pass it. I mean, everybody could do that. But what I want to do is cover the licensure process. I want to talk about the exam and some specific things that you need to know about. It was one thing when you were a freshman, it's just, oh, okay, here's some stuff I'll remember at some point. Well, now it's pretty critical. Now it's important. So let's get into it. I want to talk about really two things. I want to talk about how to get your PE license in West Virginia, because if you understand that process, you understand where you're at and what the finish line is, which where you're at right now is a senior in undergrad, and the finish line is, John Smith or Jane Doe PE. Like that's the finish line. And so I'm going to walk you through that process in West Virginia. It doesn't change a whole lot from state to state, and then we'll talk about the FE exam. So let's get into the process. So I am going to get into, the whys, stand on my soapbox a little bit. Why go through this process? Why go through the process of taking the FE and getting licensed? First off, money, okay? PEs, like when you get your PE license, it generally means you make more money. There's a lot of times when you get your PE, it's an automatic raise, and so if just right off the bat, you should consider that. Flexibility. There are jobs that PEs can do that non-PEs can't, and that just is what it is, especially for civil engineers, okay? I'm a licensed professional engineer, so that means that I have the ability to affix my seal onto plans for a highway bridge in our area. I can do that, and my peers who don't have a PE license cannot, okay? And so just by its nature, it gives me more career opportunities than folks without it, okay? It shows that you meet the standard, and it gives you some unique qualifications. Look, put the PE license, aside. If I'm HR at Michael Baker or HNTB or some engineering firm or the Army Corps or the DOH, whatever, if I'm the HR rep and I'm the person sifting through resumes and I got two students' resumes in front of me, one that has their FE exam passed and one that never took it, I'm going to take the one that never took it and set it over here, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on the person that took their exam. You're going to be applying for jobs, and you're going to be competing with, fellow students. I mean, that's just how it is. And so having the PE exam under your belt gets you a little bit further in the door. And so there's no reason not to take it. And I could go on, but I really want to get into the nuts and bolts of the process. So let's talk about the licensure process. Just about everybody on this chat or on this call right now has been through a state licensure process. Is there anybody in here on the chat that has been issued a license by a state governing body to do something? Like, has somebody issued, or has the state of West Virginia issued somebody in this chat a license to do something? And if so, what was that license for? Oh, to drive. Exactly right. Just about everybody in here probably has a driver's license. Now, let's go through the process. How do you get a driver's license? Okay. So first thing that happens is you take a paper-based exam. You take an initial exam. That's sort of your first step, that first exam. Once you take that exam, and then you fill out your paperwork and you fill out the forms, pay a little bit of money, you get your learner's permit. It's sort of the first stage is to get the learner's permit. Then what you do is once you have that learner's permit, you must use it, right? And you must accrue driving hours. Those hours must be under the supervision of a licensed driver. So you're in the driver's seat, licensed driver's in the passenger seat. You have to log so many hours. And then once you log those hours, what do you do next? You take a second exam. And the second exam is a more practice-based exam. There's usually questions, and then there's the actual practice. You get in the car and you drive with a reviewer, and they tell you to do so many actions, and you have to pass that in order to get your driver's license. And so it's sort of a three-stage process. You pass your first exam, you accrue your experience, and then you take your second exam. And once you take your second exam and go through all the paperwork, you have your driver's license. Well, the license to obtain, or the process to obtain your engineering license is pretty much the same, okay, in spirit, okay? So first off, the step-by-step process, you step one, and I sort of have a 1A and a 1B, but step one is to pass your FE exam. And so you have to pass your FE exam, and then you have to get your degree. You all are already in the process of getting your degree, so you don't really have to do anything extra for that. But you have to take the FE exam and you have to pass it. Once you get those two under your belt, you apply for your EI certification. So your EI is kind of like your learner's permit. Once you get your learner's permit or your engineering intern status, first off, you can change your email signature and change your business cards. You can be John Smith EI or Jane Doe EI. You can change that. Then you need to accrue your experience. In the state of West Virginia, that means 4 years of experience under a licensed professional engineer. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about what counts as experience and what doesn't. Once you accrue that experience, you apply to sit for the PE exam, take the PE exam and pass it, and you're a licensed engineer. Now, so let's go through that in a bit more detail. So let's talk about the preliminary steps, 1A and 1B. Okay, so the first step is you need to get a Bachelor of Science degree that's accredited by ABET. You don't have to worry about that. That's already taken care of. You have an accredited degree. Move on. Then you need to take the FE exam. I'm going to talk about the specifics of the FE exam later, but I'm going to throw out some acronyms throughout the presentation so that everybody's aware of this. So the FE exam stands for the Fundamentals of Engineering exam, and it is created by the National Council of Examiners for Engineers and Surveyors, so NCEES. So this is a national exam. You take the same FE exam in West Virginia than you do in Washington State and Maine and Hawaii and Florida. Everybody takes the same exam, and so that actually makes the process a bit easier for you as a student, because you could take the exam in West Virginia and go get a job in Florida, and you really wouldn't have any issue with transferring that. The FE exam is highly transferable. It's very easy to transfer from one state to the other. Next thing you have to do is you have to get your EI certification. So that doesn't automatically, and I'll talk about some tips and advice later. But basically, once you pass the test and you get your degree, you then need to apply for the engineering intern status. So the driver's license equivalent of that is there is a difference between actually taking and passing your exam and actually applying for the certificate, applying for the license. There, usually you would do that at the same time, but with the way the licensure process works in not just West Virginia, but every state now, those are separate. Now you apply in the state of West Virginia, we call that an EI, stands for engineering intern. Sometimes some states will call it the EIT, it stands for engineering training. In fact, the FE exam used to not be called the FE exam. It used to be called the EIT exam. So if you work with maybe a lot of older engineers and they reference, have you taken your EIT exam? They're talking about the FE exam. Okay, was there a question in the chat, Mr. Walker? Oh, okay. All right. Never mind. Okay. Let me see. Is it possible that I could run equipment and late? I don't quite understand the question, but let me say this. Later on, I'm going to talk about specifically what counts as experience, and then I'm going to come back to what you said. Okay, now to apply for EI certification, what you do is you send an application package into the licensing board. It's got a long name. It's the West Virginia State Board of Registration for Professional Engineers. I know it's a mouthful, but from hereafter, I'm just going to call that the PE board. Their website is wvpebd.org, and so I posted this presentation to Blackboard, so you all have that link. Now, once you pass your exam, in order to apply for your EI certification, you need to include the following. You need to include your application, and it needs to be notarized. Most banks will perform notary services for free. When I did my PE license, I got mine notarized at the Huntington Bank on Fifth Avenue, right down the road. And I just walked in with my driver's license and signed the application in front of the notary. It's not that big of a deal. Just make sure you bring your driver's license and whatnot. Do that. You need to get a passport photograph, and a lot of pharmacies will do that. So like a CVS or a Walgreens, you can go in and they'll take your passport photo and crop it for you and get it to the right size. You can actually do that yourself if you want, but you need to have a printer that prints on the that can print like glossy ink. You know, there's color printers, but then there's the glossy paper and the glossy ink, so that comes out like a photo. If you can do that yourself, you can. I'd just go to a Walgreens or something because it's only like, you know, $8 or $9, something like that. It's not that expensive. You need to include a copy of the notice that you get from NCES saying that you passed the exam. If you pass the exam, NCES just tells you that you passed. They don't break down how you did on the exam. You pass. If you fail, they give you a diagnostic report and tell you how you did. But as long as once you pass, they just tell you you pass. That's just an FYI. You do need your official transcripts from Marshall. When you get them from the registrar's office, they come in a sealed envelope. Keep them in that envelope. Don't open the envelope. And then you need to get 3 reference forms completed. The reference form can be downloaded on the PE board's website. You need 3 of them. I do these all the time for students, and so they'll give me the reference form. If the student fills out the top, I fill out the bottom, and then I put it in an envelope, sign it, sign the flap, and then give the envelope back to the student. Don't open that envelope either. It has to stay in a signed, sealed envelope. And for your EI, the references don't need to have their license. You just need to have 3 references that can speak to your character. I believe the only hard and fast rule is they just can't be related to you. As long as they're, can speak to your professionalism, it can pretty much be anybody, and I do these quite regularly. Okay, let's talk about work experience, and then I want to go back to Mr. Adkins' question. So once you've received your EI, you have to obtain and document at least 4 years experience before applying for the PE exam. Now, what do I mean by 4 years? Okay, the 4 years experience has to be, so here, this comes directly from the code. It says, the applicant's experience on engineering projects shall be broad in scope in his or her branch or discipline and progressive in that it was of increasing quality and required greater responsibility. The experience shall be under the supervision of a registered PE. If not, the applicant shall explain why the board should consider the experience acceptable. And so I'll talk about this in a bit more later, but what this is basically saying is that the experience has to be engineering. Like, you have to actually be doing engineering design, engineering computations. You can't be just a sales rep or something like that. Like, if all you're doing is working, in sales, and you're not actually practicing the discipline of engineering, they're not going to count that experience. It has to be engineering. Now, if you can make the case that what you're doing is engineering, then the board will accept it if you can make the case. And it also, so that's sort of what the first bullet means. The second bullet is talking about, you know, when you do your work, it has to be under the supervision of a licensed professional engineer. In some industries, that's not, sometimes that isn't you know, 100% necessary. So for instance, if you're working in the mining sector and you're a structural engineer for a mining corporation, and you're designing, you know, like, you know, guy towers and towers for conveyor belts and whatnot, because that's private property, you don't, in some cases, you don't necessarily have to have a license because it's not accessible for the by the public, but you're still doing engineering. And so there are instances where the applicant can try and make their case as to why that wasn't necessary. But usually, in most instances, it's not too difficult to obtain that work experience. One other thing worth mentioning is that if you get a master's degree, that takes a year off of your required work experience, and if you get a PhD, that takes another year off. So you know, like, if for you all, let's say a student on this call, if you get a master's degree, you only have to obtain 3 years experience. If you get a PhD, you'd only have to obtain 2 years of experience. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, with that, Mr. Adkins, did that answer your question?
I believe it did.
Okay, good. All right. All right. Now let's talk about the PE. The PE, once you get your 4 years, you apply for your PE, and the FE exam and the PE exam, applying for them are very, very similar. Just your PE exam is the application is a bit bigger, because not only do you have to include all the stuff that you did before, you know, your application, the photograph, you know, all that. First off, you have to include documentation of your 4 years of experience. So there's these forms that, okay, let's say you've had 5 jobs in that time period. Well, you need to fill out 5 forms and said, okay, I worked at this company for 8 months, and then I worked at this company for 2 years, and then I worked at this company for 6 months and whatnot. And you need to document what you did at that company, and then that company will then verify your work product. So maybe one of the first points of advice I give you is maybe don't burn bridges throughout your career, because if you work for 3 years at a company, but you know, you left on pretty bad terms, that might make this process just a bit more difficult. You do need 5 reference forms for your PE as opposed to 3 for your FE. But 3 of those references for your PE, 3 of them have to have their stamp. Okay, so so that's something to keep in mind. So not only do you want to make sure you maintain a good relationship for the work experience documentation, but also for your references, because if any of those supervisors are PEs, it'd be a really good idea to get their reference. Like I said, I'm a PE, so if anybody needs one, I can do that as well. Now, when you pass when you take the PE or the PE exam, I have here mechanical and electrical. You all can ignore that. I've taken that off, but I forgot. I'll probably you know, fix on Blackboard. But the way the PE exam works, or at least how it works now, is when you're a civil engineer, there's 2 sessions. There's like a morning session and an afternoon session. And the morning session just covers civil engineering, just civil in general. And then the afternoon session covers a specific topic. So there are 5 options for civil. There's construction, there's geotech, there's structures, there's transportation, and then there's water resources and environmental. So myself, I took the morning session the same as everybody else, but the afternoon I took solely the structures session. So now I took a paper-based exam. By the time you all take it, it will probably be a computer-based exam. Civil is set to go online as a computer-based exam in 2023. One of the reasons that civil's taking so long is because of the references. When I went and took my exam, I had to take my steel manual, the concrete spec, the bridge spec, the timber spec. There's a lot of different specifications I had to bring, and so I had this suitcase just full of books and whatnot. And that's kind of unique to the civils, just because we use a lot of codes and specifications and stuff like that. So it takes a little while to digitize the stuff that's critical to the exam. When it's all said and done, you'll have a PDF that you can download and just use. It'll be it'll be a lot better than lugging in the suitcase or the shopping cart that I've seen some people lug into theirs. Okay, let me talk about some related licensing issues and some advice that I have for you, and then I'll open the floor to some questions. The FE exam is nationally administered, so everybody takes the same exam, and so it's recognized by every licensing body. Now, to register for the exam, you create what's called a My NCES account. And I'm going to have everybody create an account if they haven't already done so. But make sure you keep up to date with that login information, because you're going to use that account for a long time. If you get your license, you can use it to track your continuing education, and so that's pretty important. In West Virginia, if you fail the exam more than 3 times, you're required to submit an educational plan to study. In other words, the board wants to know, hey, you've been failing this exam for a while. What do we need to do to remedy this? Okay, let's talk about comity and reciprocity. So if you live in the state of Georgia and you move to West Virginia, you don't want to have to take your driver's license exam all over again. You want to just fill out some forms, maybe pay a fee or two, and then just get a West Virginia driver's license. That's sort of a fancy way of saying that is you'd be a comity applicant. So a comity applicant is somebody who's applying to become a PE in, let's say, West Virginia, and they're currently in possession of a PE license somewhere else. And so because that is a thing, and it can be a thing for civil engineers. I know civil engineers that are licensed in like 15 states. I mean, you'd be surprised. A lot of times PEs are licensed all over the place. Because of that, you kind of need to be aware of a couple things when trying to get licensed in multiple states. It's very common in our profession. First off, the EI, okay? So this is a misconception I want to make sure that everybody's clear on, okay? Once you obtain your degree and once you pass the PE, it does not mean you are an EI. To become an EI, you have to apply to become an EI after you graduate and after you complete the exam. Do not wait to do this. Like, if you all pass your exam this semester and you graduate in May, like the day that your transcripts are available, your official transcripts that say you've completed your degree, apply for your EI, okay? Because remember how you need 4 years of experience? Well, from state to state, the day the clock starts changes. In West Virginia, that doesn't really matter because the clock starts the day that you graduate. But in another state, like Kentucky or Ohio or what have you, the day might be the day that you become an EI. I've heard stories of engineers who they forget to apply for their EI and they work for 4 years, and so they get their EI like 6 months before they get their PE, and then they go try and transfer their license to Ohio, and Ohio says, you have to wait 3 years because that experience doesn't count. And so that actually becomes a problem. So don't forget. You graduate, you get your PE pass or your FE passed, apply the next day as soon as possible. Let's talk about exam decoupling. So there's a growing trend among some states where what they've done is decoupled the exams. What that basically means is that in West Virginia follows a standard process where you get your EI, you work for 4 years, and then you take your PE. In other words, you're not allowed to take the second exam until after you've accrued the experience. Some states have decoupled that, and they've said, we don't really care when you take the PE exam, but we won't grant your license until you pass the exam and accrued your 4 years. I don't recommend doing that. Because, like, for instance, West Virginia has not decoupled, but Ohio has. So let's say you're working in Ohio and you follow a decoupled process and you obtain your license, and then you try and get the license in West Virginia. West Virginia says, we can't accept your application. You're going to have to take the PE exam again. And let me tell you, you're not going to want to take that test again. It was 8 hours long for me, and I'm sure you're not going to want to take it again. So I recommend that you follow a standard process. Also, like, if you look at the data for the states that have decoupled, people pass the PE exam after about 4 to 6 years. So statistics are actually going to do better on the exam if you take it when you're supposed to take it. It is a practice-based exam, keep that in mind. All right. Another thing, in West Virginia, the licenses are renewed for every 2 years. One thing I'll mention, if you're worried about money, the cost to keep and maintain your engineering license is incredibly low. My license costs $70 for every 2 years, and that's about $2.90 some cents a month. That's pretty doable. So it's a very, very cheap license to maintain. You also have to accrue continuing education. In the state of West Virginia, you need 30 hours every 2 years, and there's certain caveats with how many you can roll over. So like you can roll over 15 hours, from a previous year. So let's say in this cycle I accrue 45 hours, I can, apply 30 hours towards this cycle and roll over 15 to the next one. Everybody's license expires, every 2 years. So like if you looked up anybody's license right now, it'll say it expires on December 31st. That's like everybody in the state. Okay. Any question before I talk about the exam, because I'm going to talk about the exam specifically now. Any questions about the process, the licensing process to get your PE? What about international license transferring? I would imagine it's different than going state to state. Yes, it is, and the real kicker is that's assuming that international regions even have licenses. I mean, depending upon the country, they just might not. I know that there are plenty of places in Europe that just don't have an engineering license. But if you have specific aspirations to go to a particular region in the world, outside the U.S., I would do some digging to sort of figure out what the process is there. The nice thing about an ABET accredited degree is that it's kind of accepted as a standard. Your degree is going to be sort of viewed on par with engineering programs, not just in America but across the world. So it usually will open doors, not just nationally but internationally. What is the case when work experience before being an EI counts towards your 4 years? That is generally not accepted in most states. There are instances where there have been people who've been working like 20 years, and the board will make an exception. But generally, your work experience clock starts either the day you graduate or the day that you begin your life as an EI. So most state licensing boards will not count work before you graduate. I worked at an engineering firm throughout undergrad, and none of that experience counted towards my license. Any other questions? All right, let's talk about the FE exam. So some specifics on it. So it's a computer-based exam. It's to take it, you're going to go to a Pearson testing center. That gray box there is, if you drop a pin at Marshall University, that is the closest testing center to us. The FE exam has 110 questions. The total appointment is like 6 hours long. So the actual exam isn't 6 hours. It's like 5 hours, 20 minutes. You take like half of the exam, take a break, and then take the second half of the exam. So it's not as bad. And look at this, mine was 8 hours, so they definitely chopped it down a bit. The exam was actually just reorganized a bit, and so there are some things that were on the previous exams that aren't on this one. And they do tweak the exams every now and then. I'm going to pull up the let me stop this. Okay, so this is from NCES, and you could just Google NCES FE exam, and you can find this. This is pretty easy. These are the civil engineering FE exam specifications as of July 2020, and this covers the topics that are on the exam. So, like for example, we used to have a section on the exam that covered spreadsheet computation. So you'd have a spreadsheet and you'd be in cell B1, and if you copy and paste that into cell, C5, what does the formula look like? Those were really common problems on the exam, but they've actually removed that topic from the civils. And there are other things about that suggest that, to give you an idea of how targeted it is. This exam is built specifically for civil engineers. It used to be that the FE exam was common towards all disciplines, but now there's a unique exam for each discipline. Like take what you see here on the screen. The statics portion of the exam is 8 to 12 questions. Dynamics, only 4 to 6. So it's not as big of a topic on the exam as statics because it's not as important. I mean, for civil engineers, most of our stuff sits still, so the dynamics isn't as big of a deal. All of the topics that you see here on the exam are, they cover what was in that poll. And so you can see the topics, you can see the breakdown. I do think it's a good idea for everybody in here to take a second and look at this, to go through the exam specs so you know what you're getting into. In fact, your second homework assignment actually forces you to do that a bit. So let me go back to my let me go back to this a bit. I'm going to let you all look at that on your own. You honestly should, because you might be surprised what's on the exam and what's not. And I'm, like I said, my assignment's kind of forcing you to look at that a bit. All right, some other info on the exam. The exam costs $175, which is, it's not like, dirt cheap. Compared to other licensing exams, for other professions, like the bar exam or your medical exams and whatnot, it's actually not that expensive. And the idea is hopefully you only pay that once. You're generally so the way it works is you register for the exam, you actually pay for the exam, and then you select your when you want to take the test. I'm not the biggest fan of that, but I mean that's sort of the system that's set up, that you register, you pay for the exam before you select your time slot. You're usually provided 1 attempt per testing window and no more than 3 attempts in a 12-month period. And I think the testing window is usually like a month or so. So like if you took it and fail it, I think you can't take it again for another month or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100%, but I think that's fairly accurate. To register for the exam, you need to go to accountnces.org and log in. When you go to your dashboard, you can download the reference handbook that you're allowed to use throughout the exam for free. I think everybody in here should download that and take a look at it. We'll talk about that next week when we get into our deformables lecture, but understanding that handbook and understanding what's in it and what's not is one of the secrets of passing the exam, because having a good handle on how that handbook is structured is incredibly important. When you go to the exam, make sure that you bring your appointment confirmation letter. Make sure you bring an approved calculator. I'll show you the list of approved calculators here in a second. Make sure you bring your ID. There are also some approved comfort items. I actually highly recommend that you bring earplugs. When I took the PE exam, I brought earplugs, and I think they made a really big difference. You could also bring like a sweater or something like that, because it might be kind of cool in there. When it comes to your cell phone, or if any of you have like a smart watch, like an Apple Watch or something like that, I would just leave them in your car. I wouldn't even bring them into the building, let alone into the testing room. You can't do that. There's a big list of what is not permitted. Make sure that you're following that to the letter. You don't even bring in a pencil. They provide the writing instrument. The calculator policy, you all took Engineering 111 and you were required to purchase the Casio. The reason that we use that Casio in Engineering 111 is because it's one of the calculators that's approved for the exam. What specifically can you use on the exam? For Casios, you can use any FX115 or FX991. Any of those models, as long as it has that name in the FX115 or FX991, as long as it has that in the model name, it's approved. For Hewlett Packard, you can use a 33S or a 35S. I don't think many students use those nowadays. They have some advantages, but I don't think any of our students really use that. For Texas Instruments, anything with a TI-30 or a TI-30X or TI-36X. My recommendations are either the Casio 115 ES Plus, or the TI-36 Pro. I think they're the easiest to use and they get you the most bang for your buck during the exam. And it may not be a bad idea to bring two in case one craps out on you. And like I said, don't worry about pencils or anything. They provide pens and reusable notepads and whatnot. You just have to bring your calculator, your ID, your appointment letter, and yourself. It's pretty much all you need to bring. The FE reference handbook, it's supplied to you as a searchable PDF, so you can you can like Control F that thing and find what you need to find. But I do think it's a really good idea to go through that. And again, once you create your My NCES account, it's available there on the it's available there on your dashboard. And so I really think everybody needs to be able to access that. Speaking of, let me go ahead and pull up the homework real quick, and then I will open it up to see if anybody has any questions. So here's your homework assignment. It's going to show up at 1 right after class. But I want you all to do three things. One, I want you to create a My NCES account. And so you all, first off, you all are going to submit this as just a single PDF. You know, you'll fill all this in Word, convert to PDF. And so there's three problems. Problem one, I want you to create a My NCES account. And then I want you to include a screen capture like of your dashboard to show me that you've created it. I want everybody to do that. I want everybody to respond to the following. There's three questions on problem 2 that relates to the licensure process, and then 3 questions related to the FE exam and the topics that are covered on the exam that I want you to cover as well. And so it's going to force you to go into that list of topics to see what's covered on the exam. And those list of topics, I actually purposefully didn't put that on Blackboard because I want you all to find it. You can find it in the reference handbook. You can find it on the NCES website. I want you all to do some digging and find that. Okay, we got a couple minutes. Floor is yours if there's anybody that has any questions. Yes, Mr. Adkins.
Does it, as I understand it, there's many factors that determine if a person gets accepted to a job or not. Does being an Eco Scout be a major factor as well?
It couldn't hurt, but what I'll say is that the experience that you accrue, you know, let me put it like this. What I typically tell students from a resume standpoint is, and you might not like hearing this, but what you did in high school, everything from high school to, you know, back to when you were born, that kind of doesn't matter. Now, let me say this. If you have some unique experiences, like I don't think it hurts to put that on your resume, and I don't think it's bad, but for a civil engineering, you know, staff engineer position, I don't think it's going to be as relevant as, you know, workable experience in the field, or your degree, or the software programs you're proficient in, or whether or not you pass the FE. And so if I had to choose between that stuff and something like an Eagle Scout, I would choose the former any day of the week. Any other questions? We probably got time for like one more. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Again, don't forget the homework assignment. It is due. Hold on. Is the specific FE practice manual that you like, or will any of them work? The one I recommend, if I had to recommend one, would be the PPI one, the one from PPI to Pass. We have, or we had, copies of that in the engineering division office. Let me look into that and see what the policy is on disseminating that now with the coronavirus. But I'll look into that. We had we had a copy, but I'm not sure where it's at. I'll tell you what, I kind of have to hop off here because I have statics at 1, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If anybody has any questions, you can post them to the Teams channel, send me an email, and we can go through it. Don't forget the homework due next Wednesday. That's all I got. Everybody have a good one.